welcome back to my channel. It's very difficult to believe that we are 6 months into 2024. That's wild. I've been seeing a lot of people doing their mid-year book tags, so I thought I might as well join in. So for those of you who don't know, the purpose of a mid-year book tag is to basically talk a bit about the books that have been read in the first half of the year. So I have quite a nice long list of questions and statistics here to talk about. I am filming this a little bit late. I'm filming this on the 4th of July, but I've calculated everything as of basically the 30th of June. So in the first 6 months of 2024, I read 87 books, which I'm quite happy with. The amount of books that I've read each month has been a little bit sporadic. In January, I read 14, same thing in February, I read 14. March, I read 17. April was a great month with 20 books being read. May, 12 books. And June, 10. So the average amount of books that I read each month was 14 and a half. Now, let's talk about the genres I read. My most popular genre was fantasy, where basically half of all of the books I read were that genre. I read 43 fantasy books, which is my most popular by quite a lot, as the next most popular genre was romance with only 28. And then we dropped down massively with a tie between dark academia and sci-fi with 3 books each. And then I read 2 manga, 2 non-fiction, 1 mystery, 1 thriller, 1 horror, 1 historical fiction, 1 historical fantasy, and 1 paranormal romance. The ratings breakdown is a bit easier. In the first 6 months of 2024, I did not rate a book lower than 3 stars. I've had 2 3-star books, 9 3.5-star books, 21 4-star books, 27 4.5 star, and 26 5 stars. That does only equate to 85, and that is because the 2 non-fiction books I read I didn't rate. So technically my most popular rating for the first 6 months of 2024 was 4.5, but 5 stars is a very close second. That means, based on my calculations, my average rating of a book in these first 6 months of 2024 was 4.39. which is pretty high. Next question. What was my favourite book of 2024 so far? I think it was very clear to me what my favourite book has been so far this year, and it's most definitely If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This reading experience was so incredible, I could not put it down. I tabbed it. It was such an easy 5-star read, and I know I'm going to be thinking about this book for a very long time. What author have I read the most of so far? Okay, I went through and I had to count up, and I think the author I've read the most by so far is Cassandra Clare, as I read the entire Mortal Instruments series and the Infernal Devices series. So I've read 9 books by her. How many authors have I read in total? This was a really interesting one. I don't know if my answer is 100% accurate, as I had to go through and count all of the different authors, but I think I've read a total of 48 authors so far this year. So that means I've read quite a lot of books by the same authors, but what's more interesting is the amount of new authors I've read. In the first 6 months of 2024, I have read books by 29 new authors. I'm really happy with that. I really like reading books by new authors, as you just don't know what to expect. You don't know their writing style. So yes, in the following 6 months, I'm hoping to read even more books by new authors. Ooh, this is a good one. What are some newfound authors that I have found that I love? I have several for this. A very obvious one is Donna Tartt. I have only read 1 book by her, but I read The Secret History in January and I loved it. And I'm so desperate to read some other books by her, like The Goldfinch. I've been eyeing that book up every single time I go into Waterstones. As well as that, I read books by Liz Tom Ford for the first time. I read the Windy City series, and I loved that series. Not so much Mile High, but I adored The Right Move and Caught Up. Both of them were 5 stars. And I think the next one is coming out. I don't know when though. Let me check. Yes, Play Along is... Oh wow, it's coming out next month. I did not know that. That is really good to know. I also found Raven Kennedy, who wrote the Plated Prisoner series that I read earlier this year that I adored. It's one of my favourite series of all time. I am desperate to read Gold and Goldfinch because I adore the series. Another author that I found that I absolutely adore is Carissa Broadbent. I read her War of Lost Hearts trilogy, and words cannot describe how much I love that trilogy. All of the books were 5 stars. It was incredible. I am so desperate to read The Serpent and Wings of Night by her, as I've heard just incredible things about it. And finally, this year, I finally read books by Brandon Sanderson, and I loved them. I read the Mistborn trilogy, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm definitely going to be reading more from him. How many books have I bought this year? Quite a few. So, in the first 6 months of 2024, I bought 66 books. That's averaging at 11 books a month. Yikes. I didn't realise that. Some anticipated releases I read in the first 6 months. Okay, so these are books that came out in the first 6 months that I have read, and I have a little pile here. I read King of Sloth by Anna Huang, which came out in April, which I really enjoyed. I rated this 4.5. This was one of my most anticipated releases for this year. I read The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson. I love Holly Jackson's books. This was also a 4.5. I got through it so quickly. It was incredible. I loved it. And this also came out in April. Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This was also a 4.5 stars. Again, one of my most anticipated releases because I love Ali Hazelwood. And the final book I'm going to mention is Wild Love by Elsie Silver, which also came out in April, and this was a 5-star. One of the best romance books I've ever read. I love this so much. Books that came out this year that I want to read. These are books that have been released in the first 6 months, but I haven't got to yet. So obviously, Love Unwritten by Lauren Asher, that came out in June, so very recently. I've adored every single Lauren Asher book that I've read. All of them except one have been 5 stars, which is incredible. So I'm so desperate to get my hands on that. Next is Gold by Raven Kennedy. This wasn't technically released this year, but the paperback was released this year, so I'm gonna count that. Next is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I've only read one Abby Jimenez book, which I'm hoping to rectify in the latter part of this year, because I absolutely adore it, and I have heard so many people raving about Just for the Summer by her. And finally, Swift and Saddle by Lila Sage. I read Done and Dusted, which is the first book in the series, and loved it, gave it a 5-star. I really want to continue the series. Books to be released this year. In all honesty, I don't know about too many books set to be released in the latter half of this year, but I was able to find 4. I'm not that in the loop with new releases. Up first is Daydream by Hannah Grace. I don't know when this is being released, other than I think it's this summer, and I don't think it's out yet. I've read Icebreaker and Wildfire by her, and I really loved them, and I'm so looking forward to this final book. Next is Heavenly Tyrants by Ziran J. Shao. I loved Iron Widow. I really want to know how the story continues, so I'm so excited for that. Of course, we have Wild Eyes by Elsie Silver, which is the second book in the Rose Hill series. I'm so excited about it, because as I said, Wild Love was a definite 5-star read for me, so I'm desperate to continue the series. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, Play Along by Liz Tom Ford. I love that series. My biggest surprises of the year. These are books that I read that it's not that I wasn't expecting a lot from them, but they just surprised me. I didn't expect to enjoy them as much as I did. Up first, and probably what was the biggest surprise, was Gallant by V.E. Schwab. This is a horror book. I'm not a horror girly. I don't read horror, I don't watch horror movies, I don't like gore, and I adored this book. I gave it 5 stars. I think about this so often. I love the cover. I could rave about this book for an eternity. So this is probably the biggest surprise of this year. And finally, I have Clockwork Princess by Cassandra Clare. This is mainly because This was the only 5-star book I've read by Cassandra Clare. I read the first 3 books of the Mortal Instruments series. I didn't love any of them. I enjoyed them, but I didn't love them. Then I read Clockwork Angel and Clockwork Prince. Both of them were 4.5, and this was incredible. I loved this. So yeah, it was quite a surprise, and I'm really glad I enjoyed this so much. Books that made me cry. I don't think a lot of books have made me overly emotional this year, but there definitely have been quite a few that I have shed a tear at, so I'm going to mention the ones that I remember being the most gut-wrenchingly sad. House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. This was actually a reread for me. I read it first in February 2023 and read it again this February. I cried as much as the first time I read it. The first time I read this book, I was a mess by the end at some very particular scenes. And yeah, it was the same this time around. The sad scenes got no easier, and I was an emotional wreck for quite a bit. Up next, I have a very recent read, and that is Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff. There is really only one particular scene that I cried at, and that was because of a reveal. I knew the reveal was coming, I had already figured it out, but when the reveal was there and the words were written on the page, I could not hold it together. I was a mess. And the final book that I remember made me cry a lot is again another quite recent read, and that's Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. It's just the ending. The ending was brutal. Very, very brutal and very, very difficult to get through. The final question of today. What are some of my 5-star predictions? I have a stack of books that I'm hoping to read this year that I think are going to be 5 stars. The first being Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I've read 3 other books by Taylor Jenkins Reid. They were The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Malibu Rising, and Carrie Soto is Back. I rated all 3 of them 5 stars, so I'm really hoping that this one will follow suit and also be 5 stars. Next up is All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata. I've only read 2 books by Mariana Zapata, When Gracie Met the Grump and From Luke Off With Love. Luke Off With Love was 4 stars for me, and When Gracie Met the Grump was 5 stars. I've heard such good things about this book that I do really think I'm going to love this. Next, I have A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. I read Priory of the Orange Tree, rated it 5 stars, hoping to also rate this monster of a book 5 stars as well. These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. I don't know anything about this book, and I'm not going to lie, I'm predicting it to be 5 stars based on the cover. And finally, I have Binding 13 by Chloe Walsh. I very much see this being a 5 stars for me. I see this being a 5-star series for me, so I'm hopeful. And those were all of the questions that I had. This was so much fun. I really enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to see how the rest of the year turns out, to see if any of my 5-star predictions were actually 5-star, and I'm really looking forward to my end of year wrap up. I think I'm going to end this video here. Thank you very much for watching, and I will hopefully see you next time.